The big news yesterday, this 3-judge panel that was supposed to decide as to whether or not Democrats can prematurely redraw Wisconsin's political map, punted on the case yesterday. It's not going to go to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. It's a win, but I don't know that it's the win. Here to talk with us about it, Lucas Vebber. He's with the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. And Lucas, thanks so very much for taking some time. Thanks for joining us this morning. Appreciate it.
Hey, good morning, and thanks for having me on.
Am I right to say that this is a punt? The judges did dismiss the case, but not on the merits. They simply said, from the way I read the order, that, well, the Wisconsin Supreme Court is the one who decides. So while this is a win, it's not the final word. There's still a chance they can redraw the map to their liking at a time and place of their choosing.
Yeah, so this is the latest in a years-long saga, of course, to redraw these congressional maps. And we've said from the beginning of this case that what they're trying to do, the trial court here simply doesn't have the authority to do. They can't do it. The plaintiffs here tried to fast-track this case. They filed a motion called a motion for judgment on the pleadings. They basically wanted the court to say there's no possible way they could lose, and so they would proceed immediately to redrawing congressional district maps for this fall. The court denied that motion. We opposed it. The court denied it. And then, as you noted, the court granted the motions to dismiss here, which dismissed the case entirely. And yeah, the grounds they said for that were basically that they just didn't have the authority to do what they wanted to do. And if the Supreme Court wanted them to do it, they'd have to give them that authority.
Yeah, so this is not saying, no, you guys are wrong. No. The legislature is supposed to redraw the maps after the census, which is the way that it has worked, the way that it's constitutionally prescribed. This is a punt to say, okay, ladies, you on the court decide. With that, how confident are you in this liberal majority Wisconsin Supreme Court as they get this case?
Yeah, I mean, these issues have come before the court several times before. So recall a couple of years ago, right after, I believe it was one of the justices came to the court, right after the majority flipped, they tried to reopen the map then for the first time. The court denied that effort. Then last year, they tried another time to get these cases up there filing original actions. There were 2 cases filed there. Those were both original action petitions were denied. So that's when they ultimately filed 2 cases here at the Court of Appeals, 2 different groups of plaintiffs. So this ruling from this 3-judge panel is just one of the 2 cases. There still is another case pending at a second 3-judge panel, also with motions to dismiss pending there. So in terms of, what happens next, assuming the plaintiffs appeal this case, it would, the Supreme Court has the option to hear the appeal or not. If they hear the appeal, it's anyone's guess what happens. They could also do what they've done all along and just decline to hear it and let the circuit court ruling stand, and the case is over.
Let me ask you one quick timeline question before I get to the 2 bigger picture questions. Is there enough time left on the clock to change the map for this November? I think the assumption is eventually Democrats are going to get their way and redraw Derek Van Orden, but is there enough time between here, April 1st, and the election in November to get this map changed in this election?
No, there's not. I mean, as a practical matter, I think nomination papers for the fall election go out in about 2 weeks. So, there's just simply not enough time to redraw those maps between now and then. So, no, I would expect that the current congressional district lines would stay in place for this fall. And, whatever happens in this case would impact future elections.
We're talking with Lucas Vebber. He's with the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. Yesterday, the 3-judge panel that was tasked with the Democrats' attempt to redraw the congressional map, they punted. We don't have the power to do it. Only the Supreme Court has the power. So there's still a chance that this is going to happen. I think a pretty good chance that eventually Democrats get their way here, but probably not in time to change Wisconsin's congressional delegation this year. All right, answer me this, because I'm not opposed to politicians making political decisions about a political map in Wisconsin or any other state. I guess you could say I'm pro gerrymandering as long as you follow the rules. The legislature is supposed to decide these things. Are we ever going to get a decision from the Wisconsin Supreme Court or the U.S. Supreme Court that says, all right, here's how you gerrymander, here are the rules? Or are we only ever going to get these specific little challenges, this part of gerrymandering, that part of gerrymandering? Because everything I've seen says you can politically cut up the map any way you want. Look at Illinois. Are we ever going to get an answer as to whether or not this is constitutionally kosher?
Yeah, frankly, I doubt it. You know, in the federal courts have been very clear repeatedly that this gerrymandering claims are non-justiciable. Those are political questions for the political branches to answer and to deal with. Here in Wisconsin, you know, these are questions that we've dealt with for, you know, the entire 177 or whatever years of statehood that we've had. I mean, even during our constitutional debates, when they were talking about our Constitution and they had to adopt our initial congressional maps, there was a debate whether those maps were a partisan gerrymander. You know, I think so. These are questions that have just really, in fights that have been fought over and over again throughout our nation's history, throughout our state's history. And at the end of the day, you know, what it comes down to is that there are no manageable standards to adjudicate these claims. When is too partisan? You know, what does that mean? And the problem is candidates matter and elections matter and issues matter, right? That's why in Wisconsin, in one election statewide, we'll elect a Republican and a Democrat statewide. I mean, we're a purple state. People of Wisconsin look at candidates. They look at issues. They're not just blindly voting based on party. And all of these partisan gerrymander claims just think that, you know, party affiliation is an immutable characteristic and that, you know, if you're a Democrat, that's all you'll vote for. If you're a Republican, it's all you'll vote for. And we just know that's not the case. And so these claims, just as a practical matter, don't work.
I've never liked the idea of fair maps. Fair's in the eye of the beholder. It was fair when the 72-win Bulls went and blew people out. It's fair when the great University of Miami teams would outscore people 60-0. Fair is a very subjective idea. I have this question about the U.S. Supreme Court, and I may actually tap you for some of the specifics here, but what's going to happen to Wisconsin's maps when the U.S. Supreme Court decides the rules for gerrymandering? They've got, 3 cases before the court, the biggest being the one out of Mississippi that deals with racial gerrymandering. Is there a chance that we could be drawing a map in 2028 based on the U.S. Supreme Court's decision that says, yeah, you can't use race to gerrymander against people of color, but you also can't use race to gerrymander for people of color?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think there's a lot of unknowns here as to what the court's going to say in that case. Obviously, when that decision comes out, which should be soon, you know, any time now, you know, the question will be what do they do? What's the remedy that they impose there? And then how does that apply to Wisconsin? I'd hate to hazard a guess here, but I think it's certainly possible that Wisconsin could be facing some additional legal challenges for that.
It was Tony Evers' map, his first map, that the court struck down because it was too racially gerrymandered. He wanted to create another minority-majority district, I think is the legal term. And they said, no, you can't do that. You can't hack up the state based on where black voters live versus where white voters live. What do you think of these states who have the commissions? I know this is sort of a very popular idea. Well, let's just turn it over to a nonpartisan commission, and we've got 72 counties, so we can just draw straight lines. I've never been a fan of that. One, I would rather have elected lawmakers who I can unelect make these kinds of political decisions. And two, if you just take a map and put a box over it and say, this is the first, this is the second, this is the third, you're cutting up communities. You're really doing exactly what they've done in Illinois, where you've got 3 congressmen for one community and nobody knows who they're voting for a political reason. Would this be fixed if Wisconsin went to a commission-style fair map process?
Yeah, I mean, those kinds of proposals have come up in Wisconsin before. As you know, they've largely been rejected because they take away accountability. I mean, people in Wisconsin want accountability. They want to be able to hold elected officials accountable for the decisions they make. And, the kind of nonpartisan redistricting commissions, I mean, there are certainly some advantages of it. It sort of speeds up the process. There's going to be less litigation around it. But again, it takes away kind of that accountability side of it. So I think it's an interesting issue and one that, may well come up here in Wisconsin.
Look, I say it all the time when we talk about the Supreme Court races. Why did John Dillinger rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Why did out-of-state donors pump $100 million into Susan Crawford and Janet Protasewicz's campaigns? That's where the power is. Why is it that everybody on earth is suing over the map-making process? Because that's where the power is as well. Lucas Vebber, Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. Thanks so much for the explainer this morning. Appreciate it. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on. Take care.